In part 4 of this 5-part series, I show you how to code the client using Visual Studio 2017. Let's get going. Picking up where we left off in the previous video, I'm going to code up the client application. So right-click on the black background or whatever color it is in your version of Visual Studio and select View Code. Okay, this is our form. I like to rearrange it so that the form design is on the left and the form1.cs is on the right. But before I start coding up this class, just like I did in the server, I'm going to add the utilities ISynchronizeInvoke code, but I'll be merciful this time since I've already typed it in once. I'm just going to add a folder and copy and paste in the code. So new folder, I'm going to call this folder utils. So go back to coding up the server to actually watch me type this in if you want to go slower. But the code is on YouTube. I'll mention that, not YouTube. It's on GitHub, sorry. github.com/pulpfreepress. So if you want the code to this project, just go there and you can download it. It's this is the WinForm client. So I'm going to add a class to the utils package, or the utils namespace here. And once again, this class is going to be the exact same code that was in the Win server. And the purpose of this code is when you're running multiple threads, just to review, your user interface, the forms controls for the main app, right, for the main application, they run in the main thread. Okay. ISynchronizeInvoke extensions. And just make sure these this is spelled right. ISynchronizeInvoke extensions.cs. And once I have this class, so if you're running multiple threads in an application and those threads that are spawned off from the main thread, if they need to access the any of the components in the main thread, they need to have permission from the thread scheduler, right? You just can't go in there and access those components willy-nilly. So that's the purpose of this code. So let me just replace everything in here with the code. I'm just replacing everything just like this. Okay, so we have this class coded up. And what's the name? This class provides a public static method called ISynchronizeInvoke. Okay, so this is an extension method that's provided on the control itself, and what it does, it just coordinates. It says, hey, you know, it gets permission from the thread that's managing, from the main thread, to go in there and access the component. And if it doesn't need this permission, then it just, you know, calls it. So save this class. And we're done with this piece. Now let's get busy coding up the form. All right. So once again, I'm going to start off by just kind of organizing this code. This is the constructor. I'll just put a comment here. And if you do I didn't do this in the last video. You do 3 slashes in Visual Studio, and it gives you automatic, like a XML coding tags. And I'll just say constructor. And come below the constructor. And I will put in a region for event handlers. You don't have to put let me see, end region. You don't have to put a name at the end of the end region. I just like to do it, especially if the region's quite long. And then the thing about regions, right, is you can collapse these regions just like that. All right. And so now I'll start up here, make a little bit more space. And there's a couple constants, or one constant. And that'll just be the carriage return line feed. So when I write stuff out to the status text box, I don't have to put /r/n. So const string crlf equals, and then string /r/n semicolon. Now, if you take a look at the form, I'm going to need a variable to represent the IP address and the port. So I'll need to add those. These are fields. So this will just be a private. Let's see. So actually, I want to put two constants in here. So I'll have like a default. Let's just do it this way. Private const string localhost. So 120. This will be the name of the constant localhost, which will be string 127.0.0.1. So I'm using these for the default values, right? Let me put an equal sign here so we'll stop complaining. Semicolon, and private const int default port equals 5,000. Okay, now we can put in some variables. So I'll need a variable for the IP address that we're going to use to connect to the server. I'll put a little section. Oh, already have it. Losing my mind. Choke up a little bit. I could see it. Private IP address. Now it's not showing up on my list, right? Because I have to come up here and I need to add a few namespaces. So using system.net, using system.net.sockets. Now sockets is where we get their TCP listener and TCP client classes from. And using, for the readers and writers, system.io. So it pays dividends if you don't do it on a regular basis. Go check out those namespaces just to see what's in those namespaces. There's lots of heavy lifting done for you already. So private IP address. So there we go. It's happy. And I'll just put this underscore server address. So I'll make it server IP address. Okay, and I need a variable for the port, so private underscore port. And I'll need a variable for the TCP client, so private, or field I should say, TCP client underscore TCP client. And it's giving me the suggestion. Well, it's not giving me the underscore. I'll put that in there. Just like that. All right. And then we have our constructor. Okay. So once again, this initialize component method comes from the code that's the background for this, which is the Form1 designer, the partial class. So here is the initialize component method right here. That's automatically generated. Once again, just to reiterate, you don't want to mess around with that code. If you make any changes to your user interface, that method will be modified and your changes will be wiped out. So I can, once again, I can do some initialization in my constructor, which is the purpose of a constructor. But I think what I want to do is create a few methods. I'll go ahead and use them, and then I'll create them. So, and this is perfectly valid way to code too. So server address, server IP address equals, and I have a little utility method I'll create, get IP address. That'll grab the IP address from the user interface and parse it and return a valid IP address object. And we're going to go to the IP address text box. So here's our IP address text box dot text. So that'll be that string will be the argument to this method. And since this is the constructor, we don't need to do the invoke EX on this. So this red squiggly means we do not have that method defined yet. And then we'll get the port. And likewise, I'll have a get port. And I'll get that port from the port text box dot text field. Okay, so we still have yet to define the port. And I can do some button initialization. So once we've constructed, I want to make sure that the connect button is enabled. And the disconnect button is not enabled. And the send command button is also not enabled. Now, once I have those set up, that's about it. So let me go down and implement the get IP address and get port methods. So I'll come down here and I'll make another region called utility methods. Oops, hash code. Utility methods. Now, okay, so this will be a private. Now for the IP address, I'm actually going to be returning an IP address object for the get IP address. Okay, so private IP address. There we go. It's giving me the suggestion. Get IP address. And it's going to take a string. Okay, so string IP address. And that should be ADD RESS. Okay, now open brace, closing brace. So what we need to do is we need to try parse, right? So again, if we're going to do this type of stuff, right, we're going to put things in a try catch block. You don't have to put the try parse. You don't need to put the try parse in a try catch block, right? But I'm just going to put it in there anyway. Okay, try. That's the whole purpose of the try parse method. It does its own catching of the error, and returns false if it doesn't return correctly, right? So catch exception EX. There's all kinds of different things that can go wrong. You know, you try to parse something and it doesn't parse correctly. All right, so now here, status text box dot text, give a little friendly message, plus equals CRLF plus, and once again, the reason I do this CRLF is to put a carrier's return line feed before I print something out, just in case something's already written there. Okay, so plus, and then my message, IP address, invalid IP address. Okay, I'll put hyphen, client will connect to. Client will connect to plus, oops, get out of that quote there, plus underscore, oops, server IP address. And we'll just take the current IP address and just call the toString method on it. And that will do the conversion for us. Okay, so we've already set the IP address right up here in our constructor. Well, I haven't finished the code, right? So in here, I'm going to set it to the default value. So if the try parse does not succeed, that's when this value will be set. Okay, and then I'll just actually write the exception there. So I'm just kind of doing the exception, the catch, the body of the catch at this point. Okay, and then I'll code up the try. So server status text box dot text plus equals CRLF, right? Plus ex dot toString, and that'll just give us a better indication of what happened. You might want to code these out, or like I say, if you had a logging frame, you'd log these to a log, right? That way you wouldn't be logging them up there to your user interface. So now let's get busy on this. So really what we want to do is we're going to just do an if statement. So if not IP, okay, address, okay, if dot try parse. So IP address has a try parse method, and I'm going to feed in the IP address, okay, coming from the, the argument, coming from the parameter. This is the parameter, is what's coming in here, right? So I'm bringing in a string named IP address, comma, and then out, out the server IP address. Let me go up here. That's what I'm missing. So IP address, okay, address equals IP address dot parse. Okay, now I know this isn't going to fail. I could actually do it a different way, but this is fine. Parse localhost. Okay, so we're going to just create that IP address right there. I could have done this in my constructor, but this is fine. Now I'm going to feed this here address. Okay. So open brace and closing brace. All right. So if not, IP address dot try parse, and I have this parenthesis that needs to get out of there. IP address, okay. Your defined address here. If not IP address try parse, IP address dot out. IP address is the incoming string. Out is I'm passing in this address here, okay, IP address. This is the variable, passing that in. And then if everything goes fine, this will contain the valid IP address that we're going to connect to. Okay. And if not, then, well, so if not, right, so if this doesn't work correctly, we're going to do this. We're going to say address equals IP address dot parse localhost. Just like that again. Okay. Only because I'm not quite sure like what the status of this address is here. Okay. So we've got, let's check. Let's do this one more time. There we go. Okay, now we need to return the address. There we go. Now, so return line feed, return address, control save. And this does not still, let's see. So, try parse. I need one more. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Now it'll be happy. So, IP address, try parse, and then incoming IP address, which is a string. This is the IP address that's defined locally here. And then return address if everything runs fine. Okay. Now let's do the get port method. Get port method is going to be very similarly structured. I'm going to bring in a string and convert it to an integer. And of course, things can go wrong, so we got to put in a try catch block. So private int get port. You know, this code is very similar, right? So I think I'll just copy and paste it in. You don't have to watch me type all that stuff again. Okay. So let's just do this. All right. So here's our get port method. Same structure. We have our private int get port. String is the server port is the parameter name. I initialize port 5000. Okay. I could actually, I don't like this right here, so I think I might change it. Instead of having port, I might just change this to a const to make it, I don't like those magic values is what I'm trying to say. So I already have a default port up here, right? So I'm going to just take advantage of that and change this to default port. Default port. That's much cleaner code right there. Okay. Alrighty. So there we go. Now actually at this point, IP server address, if there's an exception, let's go up here. I have not initialized, okay. Get IP address is still throwing get IP address. That's because the name of this method is capital. Let's do get IP address. That's why it's red. Control save. And here I'm going to return just address. Address to string, not underscore. All right. Control save. And I should come up here and initialize these guys just right here equals localhost. I'll do this. Actually, I'll do this in the constructor. This is what happens when you program on the side here. I'll just leave it just like that. That should be fine. Okay. Either way, we're fine. So here we're going to set the default, return the address. We're good. Okay. So that's for the utility methods. Now let's just come in here and create our event handler method stubs, and then we'll get busy coding up our event handlers. So we have a let's go back to the user interface. We have a connect button, a disconnect button, and a send command button. So we're going to need a connect button handler, a disconnect button handler, and a send command button handler. So let's go code those up. So public, these are event handler delegate method signatures. So public, actually private, void, send. I'll do connect first. Connect button handler. All right. Connect button handler, and then we have open brace object, sender, and then event args, e, next method is going to be private void disconnect button handler. Object E. And then one more method, send button, oops, okay, send button handler. Well, the name of the button is send command, so let's make it send command button handler. Okay, object sender, event args E. All right, okay, so save that. Now you can, at this point, we can run the code. I could have run it earlier. It's always good to run it, compile it, test it, make sure things are working fine. We're not going to see any actions on these buttons, but they should be, you know, the connect button should be enabled and the other two buttons should be disabled at this point. If there's any problems with the code, we can fix it early. We might get a few warnings if some of the you know, variables aren't used at this point. So we have a connect. It's wired up. It's not wired up actually. I haven't wired it up yet. I'll wire it up here in a second. All right. So all right, everything looks fine. In fact, we can wire up these now that we have them defined. We can wire them up. So how do we do that? Let's go back to the form design, and starting with the connect button, select the connect button. Okay, so you know you can tell that it's selected. There's that little dot right there, or a square. Okay, so we're going to scroll up, and over here too it says underscore connect button in the properties. I'm over here on the right hand side. Okay, now click on the event lightning bolt. Scroll up. Well, right there is click. Right, so you see click. There's a drop down menu. And we're going to have the connect button handler. So go ahead and select that. Next, select disconnect button. And then same thing on the click. We're going to select disconnect button handler. And then send command, we're going to select send command button handler. And our buttons are now wired up. So, all right, so we're good to go. Save that. Control S. And let's go back to the code and start coding up the connect button. Now, all right. So once again, anytime you're going to do something with networking or whatever, usually most of the stuff that you're doing is going to throw an exception. So let's do a try. Open brace, just give a try catch block. In fact, what I'm going to do is just define this here. Catch exception EX, and then copy it to the other two methods to speed things along a little bit. And it might end up catching a few more exceptions, but Control C. And we're going to need that same try catch structure for the disconnect button and the send command button. Okay. So at least we don't have to type that down there. All right, so now we are the client. Okay, we are the client. So we're not listening for incoming connections. We're going to go try to connect to a server. All right, so all we need to do really is we need to create a TCP client with a given port or address, right? An IP address and a given port. And then once that connects, then we can we'll have a client as a return, right? So it's like a blocking thing. So as soon as it connects to the server, we'll have a client. It's I have a video, you'll need to check it out, like Introduction to Client-Server Programming, where it's the two client objects. So the server, if you remember from the server video, the client, the listener listens for incoming client connections and blocks until it sees one, right? So as soon as an incoming client, it returns a TCP client object. Well, it's these two TCP client objects. You can picture when you were young, if you tried to make a, talk through two cups that were attached by a string, it's these two cups represent the TCP listener class, and the string is the network connection between them. So we're going to create, we're going to say underscore client. I'll say TCP client. Well, hang on. Let's go up here. Make sure my variables are right. So I have a TCP client. You know what? I'll name that client. It doesn't need to be TCP client, just client. All right. Now let's come down here again. So that's obviously unused because it's green squiggly. So connect button handler. First thing I'm going to do is say client equals new TCP client. Okay, and we're going to go to the server IP address .toString, and we're going to go to the port. Okay, so that's liable to throw an exception. It will throw an exception if, one, there is no IP, server that's powered up listening on that IP address. So say for example, you cranked up the server, but you didn't hit the start server button, right? We try to connect to the server at that IP address, and that server's not listening. Okay, so that'll throw an exception, which is why you need to put in try catch block. Now, once we're successful, we're going to create another thread of execution. So thread, and I'll need to add another namespace up here before I get going, using system.threading. It already had the threading tasks, but I'm just going to use the threading. All right, so thread t equals new thread. All right, and so we're just I'm going to name a method here called process client transactions. All right, so there's red underneath that method because it hasn't been defined yet. We're going to have to go define that right after this. I'm going to make it a background thread, so t.isBackground equals true. Excuse me. And t.start, then we can start it. So once we have the background set, start. All right, this is be a parameterized thread start, so we're going to pass in the client to that method. So this process client transactions is going to be a method that's going to take a client as an argument. That's why you do this t.start. This is using the parameterized thread start. Okay, so and then once we do that, we're going to do some buttonology, right? We got to tweak our buttons to make them, put them in different states. So I'm going to copy up there, and I'll paste them there. So once we connect, right, we'll do this. You can't, the connect button will not be enabled because we're already connected, so false. The disconnect button will be true. And the send command button will be true, because if we're connected, we should be able to send. So save that. And all this happens right here. Now, of course, there could be exceptions, right, thrown. So we're going to have to send something to the status text box to let us know. Text plus equals CR, okay, carriage return line feed, plus, and I'll say problem connecting to server. Okay. Semicolon, and then one more time I'll just send the the exception to string, so status, text box, text box plus equals CRLF plus, and then the exception ex.toString. Okay, and that's it for this method. We have to go implement this process client transaction method. So let's do that right now. And we'll just come down here below these this region of event handlers and in between the utility methods. And I'll just have these methods right here. So this will be private void process client transactions, and it's going to take as an argument a TCP client. I'm sorry. This is a delegate, right? It has to be a delegate. So just like these event handlers, right? Whenever you pass a method to a thread like this, because this method takes an argument, this start method takes an object as an argument, right? So this is an object going in. We know it's a TCP client because we created it. But down here in the process event handler method, process client transaction, okay, that has to be object. And I'll just say it's a TCP client. Okay. Now, process client transaction. This is where the meat of this processing is going to take place. All right. So we're going to need to, first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to have a try catch. So, oops, escape. Try catch. So try catch exception ex open brace closing brace. All right, so we have our try catch. First thing coming in is we need to create a TCP client. So we'll just call this client, and we're going to cast the incoming object. Okay. So this is an object. We need to cast it to a TCP client in order to make sure we have access to all the methods, right? Otherwise, it's just treated as a client. I mean, as an object. And so what do I mean by that? So I'm going to pause right here for 1 second and just say, if I tried to access TCP, any of the methods on TCP client before I cast it to a TCP client. So this incoming object, which the parameter name is TCP client. If I try to access methods on it before I cast, these are the only ones available. But if I cast it, okay, now I have client down here. I have all the methods that are on the TCP client class. You see that? That's the reason why you cast. Okay. Now, what else do I need to do here? I need to create a string for the input, and I'll initialize it to string empty. And then I need a stream reader and a stream writer. So I'm going to create a stream reader. Okay, stream reader, and then I'll just call it reader and set it to null. And writer, stream writer, equal to null. All right, so we're going to have our client, we're going to have a stream reader and a stream writer. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to actually create these readers, the reader and the writer, right? So the reader equals new, and this could go wrong, right? Especially if there's a problem with the connection. So this is in the try block here. Stream reader, and then we get the stream from the client. So client dot get stream, like this, and that's a method call. And then the writer is the same thing. Writer equals new stream writer. Okay, and then client dot get stream. Okay. Now I'm doing stream readers and stream writers because I'm going to just send text back and forth, right? You can do other, you would probably obviously make modifications if you wanted to do send different types of things back and forth between the client and the server. Okay. Now, once we, so we're connected, right? At this point, we're connected. So the first thing we're going to do, I'll say, just say hello to the server. Say hello. Okay. So I'm going to just send the server a message with the writer. So writer. Okay. So this is initially, right? So this is as soon as I get everything initialized, writer.writeLine. And I'll just say hello. Oops. Hello from a client. Okay. Exclamation point. Ready to do your bidding. Okay. Now, once we write something to the writer, we have to flush it. Writer.flush. If you don't do this, you'll like wondering why nothing's getting sent to your server. So this is the initial. This is just initially what we write to the server to say, hey, we've connected, right? You can send whatever you want. Now we're going to go into a while loop. And while the client is connected, okay, what we're going to do is we're just going to spin here and wait until the server sends us something, right? So input, input equals reader, read line. Okay, so it'll block right here. Until a server sends something. Okay, so input reader.readLine. Now, once we've done this, we're going to say if we get a null connect from, if we get a null connection, okay, a null signal back from the server, we're going to connect ourselves because that means the server is no longer functioning. So if input equals null, okay, then, and I'm going to have another method down here called disconnect from server. Disconnect from server. So I have to define this method. Okay, so it'll be red, it'll tell me else. Okay, else switch on the input. And then I'm just going to implement a default case here, just like I did in the server video. Default, open brace, closing brace, break. So that's usually what I do. As soon as I make a case, I'll put it in open brace, closing brace, and make a, and then add the break. We're going to write something to status box. Status text box dot invoke ex, because this method is running in another thread, right? So we just can't go. We have to use the invoke ex method here. Invoke ex stb for status text box, and then stb dot text plus equals crlf plus received server plus input. Okay, so let's review this real fast. Our process client transactions method initially casts the TCP client parameter into a TCP client object. We create a string variable called input. We declare a reader and a writer, stream reader and a stream writer, and then in the try, we create the reader, then we create the writer, and then we just write something to the server to let them know that we're connected. Okay, writer.flush. And then we'll go into this while loop. So while we're connected to the server, we're just going to readline whatever the server sends us, okay? So input reader.readline. If the input is null, we're going to disconnect from the server. I have to write this method. It's not in, see this, and then else, if it's not null, we're going to switch on the input. This invoke EX is red because I have to go back up here and say using WinForm client.utils. And then that red will go away. So let's implement this disconnect from server method. So let's come up here. Let's go below the process client transactions, and we'll do, well, I'm not quite finished here, right? So what happens if there's an exception? I need to send something to the status text box. So let's go ahead and finish this up before we move on. So status text box dot invoke ex stb stb dot text. Okay. Plus equals cr carriage return line feed plus, I'll say, problem communicating I'm communicating with the server. Connection may have been intentionally disconnected. And it may have been intentionally disconnected. Excuse me. And then I'll just do a status. I'll just repeat this. In fact, I'll just repeat this so I don't have to type again. Control C right here. And I'll just print out the value, instead of this message, I'll print out the results of the exception, ex.toString. And there we go. Now, once we've executed this code, we're going to want to tweak our buttons, right? So we're going to access our buttons with this invoke EX method as well. So once this method finishes, that means we're disconnected. So we're going to disable the disconnect and enable the connect. So connect button dot invoke EX. So CB dot enabled. Okay, equals true, and then just repeat this. Well, I don't need to repeat that. I need to go disconnect. There we go, disconnect button. Invoke EX DCB dot enabled equals false. Okay. All right. Let's put that on the right side of the parenthesis. And that is a first good stab at the process client transactions method. You know, if I probably could use some more bulletproofing, right, and some refinement, but this looks like it'll go. So Control Save. And you're not going to know until we actually crank up the server and the client and start testing and see where we can make improvements, okay? So end process transactions. So now we need to turn our attention to disconnect from server, okay? And this will actually kill two birds with one stone. So private disconnect. And there's no arguments in this method. Oh, needs a no return type. Disconnect from server. And once again, because things that we're doing with network connections could throw exceptions, we're going to do a try. Try, catch, exception, EX. Okay. All right. So, not very much to do here. So, as soon as we get this disconnect, right, we disconnect from server, we're just going to do a client. We're going to close the client. Once my fingers get on the right keys, close a client. Dot close. So we call the close method on the client. Okay. And now the rest of the stuff is pretty much like Buttonology, right? We're going to send a status to the text box. Status text box dot invoke ex. Okay, stb dot text. Okay. Plus equals crlf plus disconnected from the server. Okay, exclamation point, just to make our point clear. And then we're going to tweak the buttons. Okay, so let me just, I got some code, right? Why do I have to type it all back in again? Let me go back up here. All right, here we go, disconnect. Right, so we're going to just tweak these. So Control C. Actually, I do. You know what? I actually, since we're in this, since this method is called from a thread, right? I have to use the invoke ex. So I'll just, here we go. I got these up here. Control C. So Control V. So the disconnect, the connect button is going to be true. The disconnect button is going to be false, okay? And the send button, send command button, invoke ex, so scb dot enabled equals false. Alrighty. And if we're disconnected, why don't we just clear the status text box? Well, disconnected from server. All right. If we just clear the status text box, we probably won't even see this. So I think what I'll do is I'll do this. I'm going to copy this. Control C. I'm going to put it down here. And up here, I'm just going to clear the say equals string Empty. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to close it. We're going to wipe out everything, and then the last thing that's left will be disconnected from the server. Okay, unless there's an exception. So we're going to have, I'll just do this, right? Status text box. Oops. Control C. Programming gets a little quicker, right? I'll say problem disconnecting. Once you get some code written, you can start copying and pasting. But be careful, you could screw yourself. From the server. Okay. And then I'll put in, just again, I'll go Control V. And I'll just throw in the exception output. So ex.toString. Okay. Save that. Now, this is our disconnect method. Now, we have this disconnect from server method, right? Disconnect from server. We can actually just go up here, and we have this disconnect button handler, right? So we can just say, hey, disconnect from server, right? And we can just call it from here. We don't even need this try catch. So we can say disconnect from server. So that actually comes in handy. That's what I meant by killing two birds with one stone. We have this disconnect button handler, and it's just going to call disconnect from server. And the disconnect from server, so even though this method gets called from here as well, right? If it's getting called from here, all right, it needs in the disconnect from server, because it's called from another thread, it needs to have this invoke EX, right? In order to coordinate access to those main thread GUI components. But it doesn't hurt to have that even if the method is called from the main thread, right? So in this case, when I click the disconnect button handler, this disconnect from server method would be being called from the main thread. So that's fine. All right. Now the send command. Let's turn our attention to the send command. Well, actually, you know what? Right about now, it's time to compile. Control save and make sure everything compiles fine before we get too far along. Make sure the screen looks good. We'd have to crank up the server to see if we could connect, and we could certainly do that, but I'm going to have another video on the whole testing process, so I'll wait till then. And we're almost done coding this first iteration of the WinForm client. So, okay, if I connect, right, and the server's not running, we can test that. It should give us an exception. And it does, right? It says problem connecting to the server. No connection could be made because the target machine actually refused. Well, the reason why the target machine actually refused was because there's no server running on port 5000 that would actually accept the incoming connection, right? So everything looks fine. We still have our connect button. All right, so, and this just looks ugly, right? This is only because I'm printing the results of the exception to the status text box. And like I said, if you had a logging framework installed, you could just log those exceptions. All right, so now we're in the send command button handler, and we're going to start programming that piece. And it's not very much, really, because we have a client, right? If the send command is being clicked, we have a client connection. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a stream writer. I guess I could wrap this in like a if underscore client. If the client is connected, right? If in fact, if client is connected, that's probably a good piece of code to add there. If client is connected, we're going to do, we're going to create a stream reader. Stream writer, excuse me. Writer equals new stream writer. Okay, and we're going to use the client and get the stream. Okay, so stream writer. So now we have the writer. Now we're just going to take the writer dot write line and grab the text that's in the command text box. So command text box dot text, and then writer dot flush. Okay, and then once we do that, we're going to clear the status. We're going to clear. Well, we'll say status text box. We can clear it. Let's clear the command text box first, right? So command text box dot text equals string dot empty, and then status text box. We're going to, you know, show what we wrote, right? So status text box equals well, dot text, right? Text plus equals CRLF plus command sent server plus command text box. Well, you know what? Let's do, we better move this down here. Okay, because I need to, that can't be cleared already. I'm going to do this equals command text box dot text. Okay, so so write the command text box. So if the client is connected, right? Stream writer equals new stream writer. So create a stream writer, write the command by getting it from the command text box, feed that into the writer.writeLine method, and then call writer.flush. That sends it on its way. And then we're going to post a message to the status box, status text box, to say this is the command that we sent to the server, and then we're going to clear that command text box. Okay. Alrighty, so that's pretty much it. Now, of course, something can go wrong, so we need to have an exception. So status text box, okay, dot text. Okay, we're going to plus equals CRLF plus, and we'll just say problem sending command to the server. And then we'll print out the exception. Status text box dot text plus equals CRLF plus EX dot toString. Okay, that's it for the send command. Let's see if there's anything else that we got to do. We have the buttons connected. Let's compile it and make sure everything compiles. All right, so once again, we have our form. There were no compile errors. Let's go back here. All right. You know, I never knew that worked. Watch this again, right? So I've got, here's the Visual Studio. I just realized something. When you wiggle the form, it minimizes the Visual Studio. Did you? I never knew that. That is incredible. All right, that's pretty cool. All right, so WinForm client. Now, one quick review of the code to make sure that we're done coding this part here. Looks like we are. So, all right, we're done coding the client, at least for this iteration. So in the next video, I'm going to test the client and the server. So I'll crank up the server, and then we'll try to connect, and we'll see how things work. And I'll offer some suggestions on where to take this example code if you wanted to bend it to your own will for, to learn how this works. All right. Thank you for watching. This was a long video. Hope you stuck with it. Always good information learning on how to program and network applications. And this is a bi-directional client server, so we can send commands to the server and the server can send commands to us, right? So that's the whole point, is that we're going both ways with this client server app, okay? Which has some useful, interesting prospects. All right. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day. Look forward to seeing you in the next video where we test both the client and the server.